Hi everyone, it's Lisa Mears here. Today I'm going to work with a brand new product from Pink and Main, which is their water gems. The water gems are highly pigmented watercolor powders that have sparkle. So after applying them to your cardstock, you'll see a beautiful sparkle and shine. And there's many ways to use these powders, and I'm going to show you 7 ways today. I'm going to also bring in many other supplies such as stamps, dies, and stencils, and all the products that I use today will be listed in the description box below, as well as on my blog at lisamearsdesigns.com. You'll also find a coordinating blog post link in the description box below. So in addition to the water gems, which I already pulled them here all out of the packaging, and I put them upside down just so you can see all the pretty colors. But there's also these easy flow water brushes. Now I do have a set of water brushes already, but when I saw these I couldn't resist because they're pink and I love the color pink. So these water brushes, they have a barrel inside that you can fill with water. And the brushes are all different thicknesses. So you can see this one is pretty thick. And to fill this with water, just simply unscrew it and you put the water in the barrel and then screw it back on. And then that pink part, it says push. So if you want to have the water come out of the barrel, you just push it to get the water into the bristles. And that's how you use these water brushes. So I'm going to go ahead and pull all of these out. You can see that there are 6 water brushes and they all have different size bristles. So depending on how detailed you want to get with your watercoloring, you can pick and choose the size bristle of the water brush that you want to use. So here I'm going to go ahead and open up the water gems, and I'm just going to unscrew the top, and you can see that there is the styrofoam covering over top, but I'm just going to take a poker tool and just poke 3 holes in the top. And the reason I'm doing this is because this way I can just sprinkle out the powder rather than using a spoon to get the powder out. You can do either one you want, but I find that with the spoon you might end up wasting the powder if you get too much. Whereas if you just poke the holes in the styrofoam, you can have more control over how much powder you use. I am going to be using some of this Distress Watercolor cardstock by Ranger for some of my cards, but I'll also be bringing in some Bristol Smooth cardstock as well. So here I'm just sprinkling some of the powder into the wells on my media mat. Now this media mat is actually discontinued from scrapbook.com, but they do have other mats similar to this on their website, which I will link below. But what I love about these is that they are non-stick and they are easy to clean, and they just work really well when you're making a mess like we're about to make today. So here I've already filled my water brush with some water, and I did squeeze some water out into one of the wells to mix up that powder. And you can see it forms a really pretty pink color. This is the flamingo color. And I'm just making a swatch chart just so that I can see what these colors look like. And I'm going to do this for all of my colors. Also notice that between colors, I am going in and cleaning my brush with a paper towel and some water before putting that brush back into a new color. So once I have the citrine color colored on my cardstock, I just squeeze the tip of the water brush to get that water flowing through the bristles, wipe it off on a paper towel to get me a clean brush, and then do the next color. So you can see that these colors are really soft and pastel, and I don't know if you can see, but there is a beautiful shine to these watercolors. I think you can see there with the ruby one, that's the second one on the top, you can see that shine on the cardstock. So these watercolors, they do look very pastel in color, but if you wanted to make them darker, you just need to add more of the powder. And more powder that you add, you can change the color or the intensity of the color. So there are a total of 12 colors, but as again I said, you can have more than 12 colors just by changing up the amount of powder that you add to the water. So the Milky Way color is more of a white color, and that will show really nice on dark cardstock, which I'll show you here in a minute. But in the meantime, I'm going to go back to this latte color, which is supposed to be the brown. You can see it looks very light. I did add some more powder, and then I'm just going to put some more of that onto the cardstock to darken it up a little bit more. Okay, so here's just an example of the Milky Way color on the black cardstock. You can see all of that shimmer and shine that gives on the black cardstock. So here's a closer look at the watercolors. I'm just going to scan through these really quick. You can see that when the light catches it just the right way, you can see that there is some sparkle to all of those colors. So let's go ahead and put these to work. As I said earlier, I'm going to show you 7 ways of how you can use these to make cards. So the first way I'm going to show you is how you can add color to your stamped images. There are a couple of ways that you can do this, and one way is to stamp the image first and then sprinkle the water gems onto the cardstock. So the stamp that I'm using is the Scrapbook.com Slimline Floral stamp. This is a very large stamp. You can see it's slimline in size. So I'm using my Sizzix Stamp and Stencil tool as my stamping platform today. And I went ahead and put my watercolor cardstock onto the stamping platform, and I'm going to ink up my stamp with the VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I love this ink because it's very black. It always gives a nice crisp impression. So I'll go ahead and ink that up, and now I'm ready to stamp that down. And I am going to ink this up and stamp it down a few times because the paper I'm using is thicker than regular cardstock since it is watercolor cardstock. So it does take a few stamped impressions in order to get a really crisp impression on the watercolor cardstock. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and remove my cardstock from my stamping platform, and then I'm going to take some clear embossing powder, sprinkle it over the entire stamp, and then I'm going to shake that off onto my printer paper here, and then I'm going to heat set this. So I'll put all that extra back in the jar, and then I'll just run my heat tool over this stamp. You can see that the clear embossing powder is going to give the stamp a beautiful glossy glazed look, and it will also ensure that the lines of the stamped image will stay nice and crisp while you do some watercoloring. So here I'm going to sprinkle on some of the watercolor gems on the stamped image. So I'm just putting some of the sapphire, and then I'm going to add some of the rhodolite. I'll also add the sunny, and I'm also going to add some of the emerald as well as the citrine. So you can see that I'm just tapping the back of the jar to have some of that powder come out, and it's more controlled rather than just using a spoon and trying to sprinkle it on with a spoon. So after sprinkling the powder, I'm going to take my distress sprayer and just spray the powder, and you can see that once you add water to the powder, it activates it, and you can see all of the beautiful bright vivid colors coming out. And if you want to add more, you can always add more powder and then use your sprayer and spray the powder. You can also take your water brush if you wanted to move some of that around. I just also took a paper towel to clean up all of that water that was on there. And I'm just going to go back in and just add a little bit more powder because I want some more color to this stamped image. And then once you add the powder, again, just add the water and just keep repeating the process until you get the color that you want on your stamp. Now another thing that you can do is after you add the water, you can always take your heat tool and you can move the water around with your heat tool. So adding that heat will actually move the water around and the color around on your image. You could also use your heat tool to dry your image so that it dries faster so you can finish your card quicker. So here I took a piece of the rainbow glitter paper from Scrapbook.com. I took the blue and I added it to the background of this stamped image. I also added the hello stamp. This is also part of the Scrapbook.com Slimline Floral stamp set. So you can see that by adding the powder and then spraying it with water to your stamped image, it gives more of an abstract look. You may have color outside of the lines of the flower, but this is a way to quickly add color without actually coloring your stamp. So let's look at a second way to use these water gems with stamps. So here I'm using the scrapbook.com Wildflowers Stamp set. I am going to stamp this onto some Bristol Smooth cardstock. So this is the Bristol Smooth, which is a smooth cardstock on the surface. It's not the thicker watercolor paper. So I'm stamping my image with the VersaFine Onyx Black ink. Stamping it just a few times to get a good impression. And then I'm going to add some of the clear embossing powder just like I did with the previous stamped image. And then I will shake that off and I will heat set that. So for the second technique, I'm going to actually use the water gems with a water brush to color in the stamp. And with this method, you will get a much cleaner look. You can use the Easy Flow water brushes to do this, or you can simply use a paintbrush dipped in water. So here I picked out the colors that I want to use to color in my stamp, and I'm just sprinkling them onto my mat. So I'm making a few different piles of different color of the water gems, making sure that I have spread them out enough so that when I add the water, they don't run together. And then I'm just taking the Easy brush and I'm just adding the water to the powder and mixing it together. After the powders are mixed with the water, I can now paint with them. So you can see here I'm starting by coloring the leaves. You can also see that the color is very light. If I wanted a darker color, I could always add more powder to my water, which I'm going to do right now because I realized it was a little lighter than what I want for my stamp. So here I just added some more powder and I'm just mixing that again, and you can see even in that little puddle of green water, you can see all that sparkle that's in there. So I'm just going to add the color using the tip of the paintbrush and just color all of these leaves. So when you add the clear embossing powder over this stamped image, it will actually make the stamp a little bit raised. So when you're using your water brush to paint within the lines, it will actually keep the watercolors within the lines and avoid them going outside of the lines. When you switch from one color to another color, be sure that you clean off the tip of your water brush. So all I do is I just squeeze from the barrel, I squeeze water into the bristles, and I wipe it off on a paper towel. And then I go into the next color. So I'm going to skip some of the coloring here. I already finished all of my coloring and I'm just using my heat tool to dry this so that it dries a little bit quicker. Now you can leave it as is, but if you want to add more color to it, for example, maybe you want a little bit of a darker pink now, you can go back in once it's dry and add some more of that pink color to the flower. So adding more of the color on top of the image once it's already dried will make those colors stand out even more, and it will actually allow you to make your stamp look like it has a lot more shading, as you can see with that pink flower. Now if I had not dried the image and I came back in with the pink to add more pink to the wet flower, it would just spread that color. It would not make it look darker. So if you want it to look darker, like it has some shading going on, you would have to dry the image first and then come back in and add more of the same color. So here's a closer look at that stamp all colored in. You can see how easy it is to clean up this silicone mat. I'm just taking a paper towel and just wiping it off. It will come off easily with just some water and a paper towel. So next, using the same image, I'm going to add a watercolor background around my image. So I'm using the sapphire water gems and sprinkling it onto my mat, and I'm spritzing it with some water. I'll mix that up with my brush, and then I'll just paint on this blue all around my image. So I'll just go all around the image, and I'll also get into the white areas that are inside of that image and just color all of that white area up with the blue. I'm not going to come all the way out to the edge of that card layer. I'm just going to come just like you see there on the right, just so that there's a little bit of white showing. just so that it looks like this water is just painted on to give it a little bit of a background. And I'm going to do that for the entire image. So I went ahead and added that to a card base and added a sentiment. The sentiment that I used is from the Scrapbook.com Cheerful Sentiments stamp set. I used the Happy Mother's Day sentiment. I love the stamp set because you can basically create any kind of sentiment you want for any kind of occasion, whether it be Mother's Day, Father's Day, Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthday, Halloween, Easter, and so much more. I also used the Nouveau Crystal drops in the Morning Dew and just added a few drops to my card. Next, I'm going to show you how to use these water gems with stencils. There's a couple ways you can do this, and for this first technique, I'm going to show you how you can take your cardstock, put it underneath your stencil, and then just tap on the water gem watercolor powder over top of the stencil. So just as I'm doing, I'm using the emerald color and I'm just sprinkling it on sections of this stencil. The stencil that I'm using is the Scrapbook.com Spring Floral Stencil. So here I'm using the Flamingo. This is a really pretty pink color, and just tapping that on. And then just take your water sprayer and just spray that stencil with water. If there are some spaces that you didn't get any color, you can always come back and add more of that watercolor powder. And then once you're happy with it, you can remove your stencil. So once I remove the stencil, I'm just going to take a paper towel and just pat some of that water up off of that cardstock. And you can see that the look it gives is more of a mixed media look. I love the way that this looks for a background for your card. I'm just going to wipe up with a paper towel all of this watercolor. You can see that it comes right off with just a paper towel. So I did let this set aside and dry, and look at this beautiful background. You can see all of that pretty shimmer from the water gems. Next, I want to add a little bit of gold splatter to this background. So I'm using my Scrapbook.com metallic gold ink pad. I'm just putting it there on my mat, spritzing it with water, taking just a regular paintbrush and mixing that up. And I'm just going to flick onto the background some of this gold ink. So now let's go ahead and make a card with this background. I'm using the Scrapbook.com Holographic mirror paper. I have a piece of gold, and I'm also going to use the Scrapbook.com Butterfly 1 dies, and I'm going to die cut the butterfly dies out of the gold mirror paper. For the sentiment, I am going to stamp out a sentiment that says "Miss you so much" from the Scrapbook.com Wordfetti stamp set. I'm stamping it with some Versamark ink, and I'm going to sprinkle some gold embossing powder over that sentiment. And then I'm going to heat set that with my heat tool, and then I'm going to trim that down. I chose to use the gold embossing powder because I thought it would bring out the gold in the butterflies as well as the gold splatters that I added to the card. So now I'm just going to add the butterfly die cuts. I'm just going to put glue in the middle of the butterfly so that the wings pop up. I don't want to glue it flat to the card because I wanted it to have some dimension. So I'll add the two butterflies and the sentiment. And I'll also add a piece of the gold mirror paper to my card base. I did cut the center out just so that I could save that gold paper for another project. And then I'll just add the butterfly layer right on top. To add a little bit more dimension, I'm going to use the Scrapbook.com Gold Glitter Pops of Color. This is just a liquid embellishment that will dry hard. So you'll want to lay your card flat to dry once you add this. But it's just like adding some enamel drops, only it's in liquid form that will dry hard. I think that will bring out the gold in the butterflies as well as in the sentiment. And that's going to complete this card. And for my next technique, I'm also going to be using stencils, but this time I'm going to use the watercolor gems with the Ranger texture paste. I'm just going to put some of the texture paste here on my mat. So I'm just scooping it out with a palette knife, putting it on the mat, and then I'm going to sprinkle in some of the powder and mix it really well. So the stencil that I'm using is the Scrapbook.com Daisy stencil. You can use any stencil that you have for this technique. And I'm also using the citrine Water Gems. So this is actually the orange color, but because I didn't put a lot of the powder into the paste, it looks more yellow, so it's very light. So you can see I just added it to my palette knife and just spread it onto my stencil, and I'm just using the side of the palette knife just to get me a flat surface to scrape off the excess. So you can see all the sparkle and shine that gives to the stenciled background, but I decided I want to just test this and just see how I can get the darker orange color rather than getting this light yellow. So I'm just taking some more of the texture paste and I'm adding more powder to the paste. I did clean off my stencil with just some warm water and I did dry it before adding it back to my card layer. So you can see I'm just adding some more of this powder and you can see already that it's getting darker. It's more of the orange color that I was looking for, and the more powder that you add, the darker it's going to become. So once I have the color that I want, I'll go ahead and add it again to the stencil, and again I'm using the side of the palette knife to make sure that all of the open areas of the stencil are filled in completely. Okay, so I removed the stencil and you can see that beautiful shine. And I'm just going to take the edge of my palette knife and just scrape off the edge here of the extra texture paste that's along the edge of that card layer. But look how pretty that is. You can see all that shimmer. So let's go ahead and turn this background into a card. I did let that background dry completely because you can see that I am die cutting it, and if it was wet at all it would mess up in the die cutting machine. So I took a pink and main stitched rectangle die and die cut the layer with the daisies. I also took a pink and main scalloped rectangle die and die cut a piece of white cardstock. So I'm just going to layer those two pieces together. So I'll have a little scalloped edge along the border of the daisy cardstock. I'm also using the scrapbook.com Sunny Lane floral dies, and I'm just going to die cut one flower. These flowers are really nice because they come in all different shapes and sizes. Here I die cut one of the larger flowers and I'm just inking up the edges just to add some more depth, and then you can layer the flowers together, so you can put some of the smaller pieces inside of the larger pieces to create a layered flower. I also stamped out a sentiment from the scrapbook.com Botanical Borders and Sentiments stamp set. The sentiment I'm using is Thinking of You. I did stamp it out in black and I just trimmed it down. So there's the sentiment stamps that I used, and I'm just going to add the flower and the sentiment to my card layer. For the flower, I'm just going to add glue to the center and not to the petals, just because I want to be able to have those petals stand up on the card. And then I'll add that layer to an A2 size card base. And to bring out more of the orange color, I'm going to use the scrapbook.com Summer Peach Pops of Color and just add the pops of color to the centers of the daisies on the stencil. So I did complete the card as well that had the lighter yellow daisies. You can see the difference here as they're next to each other with the difference in the color just by adding more powder. So just by adding more powder to the texture paste, it makes the texture paste a more intense color, and you can see that here side by side. So I wanted to see how this technique would look on colored cardstock. So using the same technique as I previously did with the Ranger texture paste, I'm putting some on my craft mat and I'm sprinkling in some of the emerald powder, and I'm also using the citrine powder. I'm also going to come in with some of the latte in just a little bit, but I have some colored cardstock, and the colored cardstock I'm using is kind of a greenish yellow color, and the stencil that I'm using is the Lawn Fawn Tropical Leaves stencil. Now this stencil is a 2-layer stencil, and you'll see how I work with the 2-layer stencil with this wet texture paste in just a moment. But here, let me finish mixing up the texture paste with the powder. So I'm going to take the first stencil and I'm going to tape it down to my craft mat. So I'm just positioning it where I want it. I'm going to use some of the scrapbook.com mint tape just to hold this in place. I'm going to wipe off my palette knife first to get the latte color off of there, and then I'm going to come in with the emerald texture paste, and notice that I'm just going to put it in certain areas of the stencil. So this stencil just consists of some leaves, and I'm not covering the entire leaf because you can see that I'm actually going to come in with a different color of the texture paste with the water gems, and I'm going to have my leaves be different colors. So I actually have two colors on my palette knife as I go through and fill in the holes of this stencil. And then I'm also going to come in with the latte as well. So I'm just kind of mixing up the colors. So you know how leaves are usually not one complete color. They usually consist of different colors. So that was the look that I was going for here. So once I have all of the holes in the stencil filled in, I'll go ahead and remove that stencil. And you can see how pretty that is on the colored cardstock. You can see that it's a little bit raised off the cardstock because of the texture paste, and it has a beautiful shine as well. I set that background aside to dry, and since I had more texture paste left over, I decided to bring in another piece of cardstock and just use some more of this texture paste just to create another background. So I'm just going to kind of work quickly here because you don't need to see me do this all over again. Now once I finish with this first layer of the stencil, if I want to go ahead and quickly work with the stencil layer 2, I will need to dry this background. So off camera, which you did not see me do, is take my heat tool and dry the background because I didn't feel like waiting for the background to dry. If you don't let it fully dry and you add the next stencil on top, it will smear the texture paste over the first stenciled background. So I just lined up the next stencil and taped it down, and I'm just adding the rest of the texture paste to the leaves. So here's a closer look at what the stencil looks like on the colored cardstock. I love the shimmery look that it gives, as well as the dimension and the beautiful color. It's really hard to get a look like this just with using your ink pads, and that's what I love about these water gems is that adding them to the texture paste, first of all, you can make the texture paste any color that you want just by using the white texture paste and adding the colors of the water gems to it. You can turn the color any color you want, in addition to getting that beautiful raised look on your cardstock. So since the stencil has a jungle theme to it, I decided to use my Pink and Main stamp set. It's called Toucan Do It, and it has this whole jungle theme, and I'm going to use the sloth in this stamp set. So I already stamped it down onto some Bristol smooth cardstock, and I'm going to watercolor with my water gems. The color that I'm using is the latte, so I sprinkled some of that, added some water, and I'm using the water brush to mix the colors, and I'm going to just paint with my paintbrush to color up the sloth. I felt like this color was way too light, so I go in and add some more powder to my water mixture, which you can't really see me doing there because I have it zoomed in too much. But you can see that as I start coloring with the new color, you can see how much darker it already is. So again, just add more powder if you want to darken up the color of the water gems. So to that same mixture, I added some more powder in the same color, which is the latte. I wanted to get this a much darker brown, so I added a lot more powder, and I'm going to color up the branch, and you can see the difference in color. So I used the same color of the water gems for both the branch and the sloth, and you can just see the difference in color because depending on how much powder you use, it will change the intensity of the color. I'm going to go ahead and use my heat tool to dry the water on the stamp because I want to go in and add some more color to this branch, and I want to be able to make it look like there is some dark shading areas over the lines in the branch. So I'm going back in after it's dry with the same exact mixture. I didn't add any more color to it, but it's the same mixture I already used on the branch, and you can see how much darker it looks. So just by adding some more of the watercolor to the already colored dry image, you can actually change the color as well and make it look like you have some more shading going on. So here I'm drying it again, and I want you also to notice when I hold this up close, you can see all that beautiful shimmer in the watercolor. So I'm also going to come in with some more of that color and just add some more shading to the sloth. I'm sorry it's kind of off the camera, but you can see a little bit there how I'm just adding some of the shading. Again, once it's dry, just add some more color and you can get some more nice intense color onto that stamped image. And for the nose, I'm just going to come in with a black marker. I'm going to color in the nose, and I'm going to also color in the cheeks with a pink marker. So that way I don't have to worry about using the watercolor powders just to color such a small area. And then for the green leaves, I'm going to just color them up with the emerald color. So I'll go ahead and sprinkle some of that powder, add the water, and then color those up with my water brush. I am making sure that my water brush is clean. I don't want any of that latte color on the water brush as I go in and pick up the emerald color. So here's what the completed card looks like. I did cut out the stencil with a stitched rectangle die, added it to an A2 size card, and I also added a sentiment with the sloth. So for this next technique, you can actually make card backgrounds for your cards. So here we're just going to sprinkle some of the water gems onto the cardstock. I am using the Distress Watercolor cardstock for this technique because I am going to be using a lot of water. So I'm using the eggplant and the ruby water gems, and then I'm going to spray with water after I have it all on my cardstock. Just spritz it with the Distress sprayer, and then I can lift the cardstock. I can actually move this around and get a really nice blend. So I can cover up some of those white areas on the cardstock just to move all of that really pretty color around. And I can even take a heat tool and I can move some of the color around, or I can even dry the background. I'm going to use a paper towel just to clean up that mat, and then I'm going to lay that panel flat on the mat and dry it really good. I'm going to add some more of the powder once the background is dry. So this is basically just adding the color on top of the cardstock that already has the dried watercolor. So you're just going to add a layer here, spritz it with water, and it's just going to add some more color and intensify that color even more. So I'm going to take out my heat tool and I'm going to move this color around some more. And once you're happy with it, you can leave it as is, but if you want to add more color, you can continue to add more color until you get the colors that you want. I'm going to add a little bit more powder here in this white area and spritz that with water and add a little bit more color in the white area at the bottom edge of this card panel. And I'm just using my paper towel just to dab up some of the larger areas of water. And I think that looks so pretty. So here's what the background looks like when it's completely dry. You can use your heat tool or just let it set aside and let it dry on its own. So once I have the card background, now I can turn this into a card. Adding background dies on top of these watercolor backgrounds is one of my favorite things to do with the watercolor backgrounds. So I'm going to take the holographic mirror paper and I'm going to die cut this piece of the holographic mirror paper using this background die. So I'm just going to tape the mirror paper onto the background die, run it through my die cutting machine, and that's going to give me a rectangular border with the word hello, and it's all hooked together because it's part of the background die. So this layer is going to go on top of that watercolored background. So I'll just add glue to the back of the background die cut piece, and I'll add it to the watercolored background cardstock. So I went ahead and added that to an A2 size card base. I love the colors of this card. I think it's so pretty. So with my next technique, I'm going to do the same thing using the watercolor powder onto the cardstock. This time I'm going to use some other colors. I'm using the Flamingo, the Caribbean, and I'm also going to bring in the Sunny. So I'm just sprinkling it on in different areas of my watercolor cardstock, and then I'll spritz this with water. I love seeing how these powders react with the water. I'm going to add some more powder in some of the white areas and spray with water to move those colors around. Then I'm going to take my heat tool and I'm going to dry this panel. You can either leave it like this or you can add some more color to intensify it. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. So once I'm done drying this panel, I'll sprinkle on some more of the powder and wet it again to intensify these colors, and then spray with water again. And then I'll just move that panel around to spread the water. Now if you get the lines on the edges, just take a paper towel and just dab that water off of the edges. So I've showed you how you can add the powder to a dry piece of watercolor paper and then add water, but you can also do the reverse. You can take your watercolor paper, add the water first, and then you can sprinkle the powders on. And when you sprinkle the powders on, they will go ahead and start to react. Of course, you'll need to add some more water, but you can see how they already start to react with the water because the paper was already wet. So the colors that I'm using here are the eggplant, which is the purple, the sunny, and the emerald. So here I'm just going to spray on some more water and move those colors around. So same process. Look at these colors when I bring this close to the camera. You can see all that sparkle there on top of that dark purple. I think that's so pretty. I think it's that yellow color that looks like a golden color that is actually coming out inside of that purple. So I want to intensify this even more. So after I dry it, I'm going to come back in with some more of these colors. Just add some more of the emerald and the eggplant and the sunny and spray that again. Once this background is completely dry, look at it up close. You can actually see the sunny color, which looks like that golden color on top of that dark purple, and it is so shimmery and pretty. So another thing that you can do with these backgrounds, rather than using them as a background for a cover plate, is to actually take your dies and die cut your dies with them. So here I'm taking some of the flower dies that I used earlier and die cutting some of the flowers, and look how pretty these flowers are. You can see all of the different intensities of the colors. I also have some of the leaves. You've got all of those different colors in the leaves, how pretty that is. And I'm going to also do the same thing with this background. You can see all of the beautiful colors of the flowers. So now I'm just going to put these flowers together, layer up the different pieces, and create some flowers to create a card. So I die cut the Mosaic background die from scrapbook.com out of some white cardstock, and I'm just going to add it to an A2 size card base. That way my background isn't just solid white, it still has a little bit of texture and a little something to the background. And just real quick, I want to show you what this would look like just over top of that watercolored background. You can see how beautiful that would be in the background of that Mosaic die. But I'm just going to add the Mosaic die cut piece to the white A2 size card base, and then I'll add my flowers to the top. So I went ahead and added the flowers with the leaves. I also added the Hello die from the scrapbook.com Thank You die set. And I'm also adding some of the scrapbook.com pops of color in the silver glitter. So that's going to complete this card. So I hope you enjoyed watching all of the techniques that I showed you today using the Pink and Main water gems. I will have up close pictures of all of my cards over on my blog, and you can check out that corresponding blog post link in the description box below, as well as all of the supplies that I used will be listed in the description box of this YouTube video as well as on my blog. If you like this video and you got something out of it, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more videos like this from me, go ahead and click that subscribe button and turn on your bell notifications so that you'll be notified every time I release a new video. Thank you for watching, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.